Somewhere in the deep, cold waters of the northern Arabian Sea, a predator moves in silence. It carries no flag on its hull. It makes no radio transmissions. It surfaces only once every 24 hours, just enough to receive orders from a command room nearly 6,000 miles away in Northwood, London. Its name is HMS Anson, and right now it is the most strategically significant vessel in the world. To understand how a British nuclear-powered attack submarine came to be lurking within striking distance of Iran, you have to go back, not weeks, but years. The architecture of this crisis was built slowly, piece by piece, through failed nuclear negotiations, shattered regional alliances, and a series of escalating miscalculations that finally reached their violent conclusion on the night of February 28, 2026. That was the night the United States and Israel launched a coordinated surprise strike on Iran under the codename Operation Epic Fury, targeting military facilities, nuclear sites, and Iranian leadership itself. Among those killed in the opening salvos was Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, a figure who had defined Iranian foreign policy for over 3 decades. The world changed in a single night. Iran's response was swift and sweeping. Tehran launched retaliatory missile and drone attacks on U.S. military bases, Israeli territory, and multiple Gulf states, while its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued warnings prohibiting vessel passage through the Strait of Hormuz, effectively halting the flow of global shipping through one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. What followed was not simply a regional war, it was an earthquake under the foundation of the global economy. The Strait of Hormuz is just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, with shipping lanes barely 2 miles across in either direction. Yet through that sliver of water passes approximately 20 million barrels of oil every single day, roughly 20% of the world's entire seaborne oil trade. China, India, Japan, South Korea, the engines of the global economy, all depend on those lanes staying open. When they closed, the world felt it immediately. Brent crude oil prices surged past $100 per barrel on March 8th and peaked at $126 per barrel, the fastest price spike in any conflict in recent history. More than 150 ships anchored outside the strait, too afraid to move. Energy analysts described it as the largest disruption to global oil supply since the 1970s energy crisis, and it was still growing. Iran's retaliatory campaign hit U.S. embassies and military installations across the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, Oman, and Jordan. Dubai International Airport, one of the world's busiest aviation hubs, was damaged by drone strikes, temporarily halting all flights and reopening only in a limited capacity days later. The region had become a war zone, and Britain, whether it wanted to or not, was already in the middle of it. For years, London had tried to walk a careful line, maintaining diplomatic ties with Tehran while standing firm on nuclear non-proliferation. That balance had already been eroding. The attacks came at a moment when the Iranian regime was arguably at its weakest point in years, battered by extensive protests in early 2026, a struggling economy, failing infrastructure, and the near-total degradation of its regional proxy network following years of Israeli military action. Iran's deterrent architecture, built over decades, had been systematically dismantled. What remained was a cornered regime with something to prove and missiles to prove it with. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer moved cautiously at first. In the days following the opening strikes, he agreed to allow the United States to use British bases for operations aimed at protecting maritime shipping and degrading Iranian missile capabilities threatening the Strait of Hormuz, an expansion beyond the purely defensive authorization he had previously granted. It was a significant escalation of Britain's role, and it did not go unnoticed in Tehran. Iranian Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi publicly criticized the UK's decision, stating that such actions constituted participation in ongoing hostilities and that Iran reserved the right to respond under the principle of self-defense. This was not a diplomatic protest, it was a warning. And so on March 6, 2026, HMS Anson quietly slipped away from the port of Perth on Australia's western coast. It had been there as part of activities linked to the AUKUS security partnership, the trilateral defense pact between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, that had been quietly reshaping Indo-Pacific military architecture since 2021. Now, that same submarine began an 8,800-kilometer journey across the Indian Ocean toward a crisis already in full bloom. HMS Anson is an Astute-class nuclear-powered attack submarine based at Faslane in Scotland. Its nuclear reactor requires no refueling throughout its 25-year service life, a tactical advantage that means the vessel can remain submerged and invisible for extended periods, constrained only by the endurance of its crew and the food in its stores. What makes HMS Anson particularly dangerous is not its stealth alone. The submarine is fitted with Tomahawk Block 4 land attack missiles with a range of 1,000 miles and Spearfish heavyweight torpedoes. That range means that from a position deep in the northern Arabian Sea, Anson holds the entirety of Iran's military infrastructure within its crosshairs, its missile batteries, its naval facilities, its command centers, its IRGC installations. The British government has not confirmed the submarine's exact position. It doesn't need to. The message is delivered whether acknowledged or not. The submarine surfaces to just below the waterline once every 24 hours to establish communication with the UK's military command centre at the Permanent Joint Headquarters in Northwood, where Lieutenant General Nick Perry, the Chief of Joint Operations, would be responsible for issuing a launch order if authorised by the Prime Minister. Should such authorization be granted, HMS Anson would rise close to the surface and dispatch a salvo of 4 missiles. 4 missiles, each one a precision strike capable of penetrating hardened military facilities, each one flying below radar, each one arriving before Iran could even confirm it had been fired. The deployment of HMS Anson is not an isolated decision. It sits within a much larger pattern of British strategic behavior that has been quietly building for years. The 2025 Carrier Strike Group deployment, Operation High Mast, had sent HMS Prince of Wales and her escorts through the Arabian Sea twice, conducting dual carrier exercises with India and demonstrating that Britain still possessed genuine blue water naval capability. UK Defence Secretary John Healey had been characteristically direct about the purpose of such deployments. The Royal Navy was demonstrating its formidable capability while protecting British values and sending a powerful message of deterrence to any adversary. Deterrence, in the language of military planners, is just another word for the threat of lethal consequence. But deterrence only functions if your adversary believes you will act. And in this regard, the picture for Britain is more complicated. For the first time since 1980, Britain has no surface warship deployed in the Arabian Gulf. HMS Lancaster, Britain's last frigate in the region, left late last year. Its sole remaining minesweeper, HMS Middleton, departed Bahrain in March 2026, leaving an aching void in British surface presence at the exact moment when the region needed it most. A serving Royal Navy officer described the situation as symptomatic of decades of underinvestment, a fleet hollowed out to its lowest strength in generations. Just 6 destroyers and 7 frigates remain in the entire surface escort fleet. The Royal Navy that once patrolled every ocean simultaneously now struggles to sustain a Gulf presence during a regional war. This is precisely why HMS Anson matters so much. In the absence of surface ships that Britain cannot afford or sustain, submarines become the instrument of sovereign power projection. They are invisible, deniable, and devastating, and they require no diplomatic clearances, no basing agreements, no logistics chains visible from satellite imagery. A submarine in the Arabian Sea is Britain's way of sitting at the table without pulling up a chair. Iran has not been passive in the face of this pressure. Missiles aimed at the joint U.S.-UK base at Diego Garcia on the Chagos Islands were reported, one breaking apart mid-flight, a second intercepted by a SM-3 air defense missile launched by a U.S. warship. That Iran even targeted Diego Garcia, a remote British Indian Ocean Territory installation, signals the degree to which Tehran views Britain as an active combatant, not merely a concerned bystander. The geography of this conflict has stretched far beyond the Persian Gulf. On March 26, President Trump announced a 10-day extension of his deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, pushing a threatened strike on Iranian power plants to April 6th, citing ongoing diplomatic talks. Iran's new leadership under Mojtaba Khamenei, the late supreme leader's son, has signaled that the strait's closure is now a matter of state policy, not a temporary tactical measure. In his first statement as Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei declared that the closure of the Strait of Hormuz must remain a priority and warned of new fronts being opened where, in his words, the enemy has limited experience and is highly vulnerable. These are not the words of a regime seeking an off-ramp. These are the words of a regime preparing for a long war. Against this backdrop, HMS Anson waits, quiet, patient, precise. It is Britain's answer to a question no one wanted to ask. What does a mid-sized naval power stretched thin and underfunded do when the world's most critical waterway is under fire and its most important ally demands solidarity? It sends what it has. And what it has right now is one of the most capable hunter-killer submarines ever built, armed with missiles that could change the course of this conflict in a single launch order. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide. HMS Anson's Tomahawks fly 1,000 miles. The arithmetic of this deployment is not subtle. Britain has placed a loaded weapon at the throat of Iran's military machine, and the world is watching to see whether the trigger will ever be pulled. Every 24 hours, Anson rises silently toward the surface, receives its orders, and descends again into the dark, waiting, watching, ready. This is what British power looks like in the 21st century, not in the roar of carrier jets or the flash of surface guns, but in the silence of deep water, where the most consequential decisions are made in the dark, far from any crowd that might be watching.